The courthouse fell silent as General Sarah Hayes presented the final piece of evidence, which exposed a criminal network that had terrorized America's coastal towns for years. Dozens of local business owners, police officers, and citizens from Litchfield Horsey Cove were there to witness justice being served. It's hard to believe that just months ago, their peaceful seaside town was under the iron grip of the Wild Wolves motorcycle gang and corrupt officials who thought they were untouchable. Nobody knew that their downfall began with a single confrontation at a quiet diner when they made the mistake of threatening the wrong woman over a cup of coffee. It all started with a single confrontation at a quiet diner. The Wild Wolves had made the mistake of threatening the wrong woman over a cup of coffee. This is the story of General Sarah Hayes, a decorated Army commander whose 30 years of classified operations prepared her for dismantling one of the largest criminal enterprises on the East Coast. It's about how her decision to stand up to two bikers, one quiet evening, sparked an operation that would expose hundreds of millions of weapons, drug trafficking rings, corrupt politicians, and international criminal networks. It's a tale of how sometimes the scariest person in the room isn't the one making threats. It's the quiet woman in the corner. She knows exactly how to take down an empire. But to understand how an entire criminal organization crumbled, how corrupt officials ended up in federal prison, and how a network of small coastal towns reclaimed their freedom, we need to go back to that fateful evening at the Lighthouse Diner. That's when the Wild Wolves made the biggest mistake of their lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The evening fog rolled in thick off the ocean, blanketing the streets of Lighthouse Cove in a ghostly shroud. General Sarah Hayes sat alone at her usual window booth in the Lighthouse Diner, watching the steam rise from her coffee cup in lazy spirals. She'd chosen this small coastal town precisely because nothing ever happened here. After 30 years of classified operations and missions that would never make the history books, all she wanted was quiet Betty Williams, the lovely, haired owner who'd run the diner for over 3 decades, approached with a fresh pot of coffee. "You're too young to look so tired, dear," she said, topping off Sarah's cup with her warm smile. It reminded Sarah of her mother, who had passed away 15 years ago. Betty had no idea about the nightmares that still woke Sarah in cold sweat, or why she always chose the booth with the clearest view of both exits. The peaceful evening was shattered as 5 motorcycles roared into the parking lot. Their engines were deliberately loud. The sound was enough to rattle the diner's windows. The other customers tensed up a bit, their conversations dying mid-sentence. Betty's smile faltered a little as she gripped the coffee pot tighter. Sarah watched the Wild Wolves, with their distinctive wolf emblem on their leather jackets, as they dismounted. She noted how the other patrons suddenly found their breakfast extremely interesting. Marcus Spike Davidson led the way, his scarred face twisting into what he probably thought was a charming smile as he surveyed the room. His lieutenant, Tank Thompson, followed close behind, both men moving with the exaggerated confidence of bullies who'd never faced real resistance. Spike's gaze lingered on Sarah for a moment too long before turning to Betty. "Betty, sweetheart," he called out, his voice carrying an edge that made several patrons look away. "We missed you at the town meeting last night." Mayor Wilson was disappointed. Betty's hands trembled slightly as she sat down. "Spike, you know how it is, sure." "Sure," Spike replied, moving closer. "But when the mayor calls a meeting, it's not really optional. He's trying to help this town grow, and he needs everyone's support." His hand came down hard on the counter, making Betty flinch. Sarah watched the exchange silently, her coffee forgotten. She catalogued details with practiced precision. Tank carried a knife in his boot, poorly concealed. Spike's jacket bulged slightly on the left side. They were both confident, but their posture was amateurish. It seemed like they were used to intimidation, but their sloppy weapon discipline told her they'd never faced serious resistance. Maybe, Betty said, her voice stronger now, that the mayor should focus on running the town instead of letting criminals dictate policy. The diner went dead silent. Spike's fake smile vanished. "What did you just say to me, old woman?" he growled. Reaching across the counter, Sarah moved before conscious thought took over. She was grateful for her 30 years of military command experience, which kicked in. As she grabbed Spike's wrist, applying precise pressure to nerve clusters that made his fingers spasm and open, she said, "Oh, that's enough, dear." Her voice was quiet, but carried the authority that had commanded thousands. Tank moved toward her, but Sarah's gaze stopped him cold. "I wouldn't," she advised. "Your draw is slow, and you telegraph your intentions by the time you clear leather. This will be over before you know it. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Lady Spike snarled, trying to pull his hand free, but Sarah's grip remained. Iron actually, she replied calmly. Marcus Spike Davidson, dishonorable discharge from the army in '87. You and the Wild Wolves have been running protection rackets up and down the coast, but lately you've moved up to something bigger. Did I miss anything? The color drained from Spike's face. Tank's hand twitched toward his concealed weapon, but Sarah's voice stopped him. Last warning. How this ends. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Spike raised his free hand and surrendered. All right, we're leaving. We released him, stepped back to give them space to exit as they mounted their bikes. Spike shot one last glare through the window. This isn't over. Oh, it can be, Sarah replied, though he couldn't hear her. That's entirely up to you. As the motorcycles roared away, Betty approached with shaking hands. Who are you? She whispered. Sarah sat back down, taking a sip of her now cold coffee. She was just someone who'd seen enough bullies for one lifetime. But as she watched the Wild Wolves disappear into the fog, she knew Spike was right about one thing. This wasn't over. She just painted a target on her back. But as she looked into the distance, she felt a sense of calm. She knew that whatever happened next, the older woman was looking out for her. Wolves disappear into the fog. She knew Spike was right about one thing. This wasn't over. She just painted a target on her back, and if her instincts were correct, the protection racket was just the tip of the iceberg. Betty placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of her along with a slice of apple pie. Whatever happens next, the older woman said firmly, you're not alone. Sarah nodded, already running through scenarios in her mind. She'd chosen this town looking for peace, but sometimes peace it had to be fought for. And if the Wild Wolves wanted a fight, they were about to learn why army generals were the last people you wanted as enemies. Late that evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment above the Lighthouse Diner, cleaning her Glock 19 with practiced precision. The encounter with the Wild Wolves played over in her mind as she considered her next move. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It's open, she called out, not looking up from her work. Sheriff, she said, smiling. Tom. Cooper stepped inside. His weathered face betrayed concern. Word travels fast in a small town, he said. I heard you had a run-in with Spike and his boys. Just a friendly chat with some customers who were being impolite, Sarah replied, reassembling her weapon. Cooper sat down across from her. I know about your background when you moved here 6 months ago, he said. I ran a check. 30 years in the army. Multiple commendations. Things so classified. Even my law enforcement clearance couldn't access them. Sarah finally looked up, meeting his gaze. You know, I can handle myself. That's what worries me. The Wild Wolves aren't just some local gang anymore. They've got connections, deep ones. Cooper leaned forward, lowering his voice. Last month, my deputy found a suspicious shipment at the port before we could investigate. Orders came down from the state level to back off. It sounds like someone's being paid to look the other way. Mayor Wilson. Cooper's voice was tight with concern. I've got a teenage daughter, Sarah. I can't risk it. So you turn a blind eye. Sarah finished for him. I do what I can without getting my people killed. Marcus Cross is coming to town next week. He's got connections to smuggling operations across 3 continents. Sarah's expression was neutral, but her mind was racing. Cross was a name she'd heard before. It was during her last mission with Army intelligence. It had gone sideways, costing the lives of 2 of her teammates. Thanks for the warning, Sheriff. As Cooper reached the door, he paused. What's up? Nothing much. Just thought I'd say thanks for the heads up. You're welcome. Betty Williams is a good woman. She's been serving coffee and pie in this town since I was a kid. I've lived here since I was a kid, and I've always thought she was a good woman. I'm so glad someone finally stood up for her. Cooper, you should have told me. After Cooper left, Sarah pulled out her phone and called a number she hadn't used in months. Marcus Cross and the Wild Wolves MC official channels only. I don't want to burn any of your backdoor sources, Mike. He sighed and said, give me 48 hours and Sarah, be careful. Cross isn't someone you want to tangle with alone, she said. Who said I'm alone? She ended the call and moved to the window, watching as 2 Wild Wolf prospects tried to look casual while monitoring the diner from across the street. Their surveillance was amateur and sloppy. They wanted her to know she was being watched. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Initial data was coming through. Cross definitely your guy. Got coordinates for multiple port facilities. Also local intel. This suggests that there might be a retired Spec Ops presence in town, which would be really great to connect with. Sarah smiled, happy that things were falling into place. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, please subscribe to our channel. We would love it if you did. Back to the story, the morning crowd would start filtering in soon. Regulars who'd witnessed yesterday's confrontation spread the word that someone had finally stood up to the wild wolves around noon. Deputy Sarah Martinez entered, making her way for Sarah's usual booth. "You need to see something," she said quietly, sliding a manila envelope across the table. Sarah reviewed the photos inside. "Oh, this is interesting. It looks like the wild wolves have some new security measures in place. They've got surveillance footage from the port, and they're using professional security teams to oversee cargo containers at night. They've even got official stamps on the documentation. It's like they're getting a bit sloppy, and they're probably scared. Spike's got his people watching, so we'll just have to be careful. This place is watching you, but they're not being subtle about it." Sarah had noticed two prospects had been parked across the street all morning, trying too hard to look casual. "Your boss knows you're showing me this," Martinez said with a smile. "Tom's a good man, but he's scared me. I'm tired of watching these bastards destroy our town. Betty was there for me when my mom died. She made sure I had hot meals and a place to do homework. I've got her back, same as you, Sarah. I'm not the only one who's had enough." As if on cue, the rumble of motorcycles approached. These weren't wild wolves, though. The riders' patches identified them as the Iron Veterans, a group Sarah had noticed around town but never interacted with. Their leader, a massive man known as Stone, dismounted first. Frame filled the doorway as he entered. His eyes scanned the room before settling on Sarah. "Mind if we join you?" he asked with a kind smile. Deputy Martinez tensed, but Sarah nodded as Stone and three of his officers slid into the booth. Betty appeared with coffee, seemingly unfazed by the new arrivals. She was a trooper, that Betty. "You had words with Spike," Stone said after Betty left. "Man's got a reputation for holding grudges. Is that why you're here to warn me?" Stone chuckled. "No, ma'am. We're here because the wild wolves are moving contraband through our territory without permission. Military-grade hardware, the kind that gets people killed." She looked over at Martinez, who stood her ground. "We thought you might be interested, Ed, in a conversation about mutual interests." Sarah leaned back and studied the bikers. She could tell from their posture and the way they carried themselves that they had military backgrounds. Unlike the wild wolves, they looked her in the eye with respect. "I'm listening." Stone glanced at Deputy Martinez again. "Deputy Martinez stays," Sarah said firmly. "She's part of this." "Fair enough." Stone leaned forward. "Cross is coming to oversee a major shipment. Something big enough that Spike got his people running scared. We've got intel, manpower, and motivation. What we need is someone who knows how to run an OP like this, someone with army training. You hear a lot of military folks in a small community." Stone's voice softened slightly. "I knew Johnson. He was a good man." The mention of her fallen teammate hung in the air after a moment. Sarah spoke up. "If we do this, we do it my way. Clean, precise, by the book, no cowboy stuff. That's just not my style, Commander." As the Iron Veterans left, Martinez let out a breath she'd been holding. "You sure about this, Sarah? You know, I watched the bikers mount up through the window." The two wild wolves prospects across the street were frantically making phone calls. "No," she admitted. "Sometimes you have to work with the devil you know to take down the one you don't." The pieces were moving, and now Cross was coming. He was bringing with him whatever operation had spiked so much nervousness that even the Iron Veterans were on board, and Martinez represented a potential link to legitimate law enforcement. All Sarah needed was a plan that wouldn't get everyone killed. Night had fallen over the small coastal town when Sarah's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Mike. She opened the file to find detailed satellite imagery of 3 locations around the port warehouses registered to shell companies, serving as wild wolves storage facilities. A knock at her door interrupted her analysis. "You've got visitors," Betty whispered from the other side in the back alley. "They say they're friends of yours." Sarah grabbed her Glock, following Betty down the back stairs in the shadowy alley. She found Stone and his sergeant at arms along with an unexpected figure, Sheriff Cooper. "We've got a problem," Cooper said without preamble. "It's not just a routine inspection. He's moving his entire operation here permanently." Sarah asked, though she was already piecing it together. Stone spoke, "Lighthouse Co's perfect remote control. Local government, easy access to shipping lanes, but that's not the real reason." He handed Sarah a folder. "Our contacts spotted these guys arriving at the private airstrip outside town. The surveillance photos showed familiar faces. Members of the same smuggling network Sarah had encountered in Singapore. The operation that had gone wrong. They're consolidating, Sarah muttered, using the wild wolves as cover for a major distribution hub. It gets worse, Cooper added. Mayor Wilson called an emergency council meeting tonight. They're voting to slash the police budget by 60%. I'll have to lay off half my deputies, including Martinez. Clearing the board, Sarah concluded. There's no official resistance. Stone nodded grimly. Cross arrives in 3 days. Spike's boys are already setting up additional security. Sarah studied the photos again. They'll be expecting trouble from law enforcement. Maybe rival gangs, but they won't be looking for an army intelligence operation, not exactly. Cooper corrected. Not exactly, Stone smiled. Half my crew are former Special Forces Rangers, Marine Recon. We've even got a couple of Delta boys. We've kept it quiet and maintained our cover as just another MC, but we've got the training. Sarah raised an eyebrow. A motorcycle. Club full of Spec Ops veterans. Someone's got to watch out for the little guy. We've been tracking Cross for months, gathering intel, but we needed someone with your specific experience to put it all together, Stone replied. Cooper let out a deep sigh. What did you have in mind? I need Martinez and any other deputies you trust completely to do some selective enforcement traffic stops, license checks, anything to slow down their movements and gather intel. They'll complain to Wilson. Cooper warned, let them. It'll make them sloppy and paranoid. She turned to Stone. I need your people to start pressure testing their security. Nothing obvious, just enough to keep them looking in the wrong direction. Stone grinned. I already started. My boys ran a few bikes past their checkpoints earlier. They got them all spun up about potential rivals moving in. They're good. They're expecting gang warfare, so they won't be looking for a surgical strike. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed them Mike's satellite imagery. We've got 3 days to map their security, identify vulnerabilities, and set up for the main event. What exactly is the main event? Martinez asked. We're going to let Cross set up his, Cooper replied. Operation exactly as planned. Let him bring in his international contacts and his whole network. Then Sarah smiled warmly and said, We're going to take it all down at once, but we'll need one more piece of the puzzle. Cooper said, What's that evidence? Cooper replied, Just enough to bypass Wilson and go straight to the feds. The kind of evidence that even corrupt politicians would be too afraid to face up to. Betty, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. I might be able to help with that. The diner's been here for 40 years. Betty continued, Everybody comes through here eventually, even people who think they're too important to be seen in a place like this. Everybody talks, Sarah said, looking at the older woman with newfound respect. You've been keeping track of names, dates, and conversations. I may be just a diner owner, but I'm not stupid. I knew someday someone would need to know what really goes on in this town. Betty pulled a worn leather notebook from her apron pocket. 90 years of notes, she said proudly. Everything from Wilson's first meeting with the wild wolves to which council members started living beyond their means. Stone let out a low whistle. Ma'am, you might just be the most dangerous person here. Meet back here tomorrow night, Sarah instructed. Bring your best people, she told the sheriff. We'll need everything, Betty added. And whatever your deputies can legally gather, we've got one shot at this. As the group dispersed, Betty touched Sarah's arm. You're not just doing this for the town, are you? She asked. This is personal, Sarah replied, thinking of her fallen teammates and the mission that had gone wrong. Sometimes personal motivation just means you'll work harder to get it right. Back in her apartment, Sarah spread out the intel and started to form a plan. Cross had no idea he was walking into a trap. 3 years in the making, he thought. And I thought he was expanding his empire, but he was really stepping into a sniper's crosshairs. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Satellite shows more movement. Whatever they're planning, it's massive. Watch your 6, Sarah. By the time Sarah got to the Lighthouse Diner, she found Jake and 2 of his lieutenants arguing intensely across the street. Even from a distance, she could see their frustration. Your coffee's getting cold, Betty said, sliding into the booth across from her. She placed her worn notebook on the table. Here's everything I've got on Wilson and his cronies. 10 years of notes, conversations, and meetings that weren't supposed to happen. Sarah flipped through the pages, her expression hardening. Betty, this is more than just weapons smuggling. They've been laundering money through half the businesses in town. I started keeping track because I wanted to help. My dear God rest his soul always said knowledge was power when he passed. They started pressuring me to sell the diner. I knew I needed insurance. A commotion outside drew their attention. Spike was shoving one of his own men against a wall, clearly enraged. The pressure was getting to them. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Stone. Package secured. Meet at the old cannery. I need to go. Sarah told Betty to stay alert. Things are going to get tense before they get the abandoned cannery, situated on the outskirts of town, is a fitting reminder of the past. Its rusted equipment, a silent sentinel, watches over the land. Sarah found Stone and his core team waiting inside, along with an unexpected guest. A bound and gagged wild wolf prospect had been discovered snooping around their territory. Stone explained that he'd figured he might have something interesting to share. Sarah approached the terrified prospect, recognizing him as one of the newer recruits, barely old enough to drink. "What's your name, kid?" she asked kindly. "Tommy," he stammered once Stone removed the gag. "Let's talk about We're expecting a shipment with Cross. I don't know much about Tommy, but I know you're a prospect, which means you'll be doing the grunt work. Loading, unloading, keeping watch. You know things, so I'm wondering, are you willing to share those things, or do we have to get creative?" The young man swallowed hard. "They'll kill me," he said. "Kid," Stone growled. "What do you think they'll do when they find out you got caught on our turf?" Tommy spilled everything. The shipping schedules, the guard rotations, the layout of the compound. But it was his last piece of information. Sarah's heart was racing. "They've got some kind of list," he said, "names, locations, crosses. It's personal for Spike." Sarah and Stone exchanged looks. A list like that could expose entire trafficking networks and reveal every corrupt official on Cross's payroll. Tommy added, his voice shaking. "They know someone's working against them. Spike called in extra muscle professional guys, not just bikers." Sarah's phone buzzed again. Martinez, problem, Wilson just suspended Cooper and Cooper named Spike's brother. As the interim sheriff put him somewhere safe, Sarah told Stone, nodding toward Tommy, he might be useful later back at the diner. Sarah found Martinez waiting with Cooper and Betty. The former sheriff looked defeated. "They're moving faster than we expected," Cooper said. "Wilson called it a routine administrative review, but we all know what this means," Martinez added. "My badge probably won't be worth much by morning," Sarah said, considering their options. With Cooper out and legitimate law enforcement, they'd lost their official cover. Her phone buzzed again. "Mike," she said. "The satellite shows lots of movement, with lots of vehicles heading your way. It looks like they're not just ordinary gang members, but professional operators. So just be careful, okay?" I saw 3 black SUVs with tinted windows driving slowly past the diner. "They're not trying to be subtle at all." Martin said they don't need to be, and Sarah replied that they think they've got control of the town, which makes them confident. "That makes them a bit sloppy, don't you think, Betty? You know, we changed the plan, so what do we do now? I'm sure we'll be okay, but we'll have to be careful. I think they're expecting resistance from law enforcement, or rival gangs, so we give them exactly what they're watching for while we hit them from a direction they'll never see coming. The Iron Veterans, Cooper asked part of it, but we've got another card to play." Sarah pulled out her phone, dialing Mike. "Remember that favor you owe me? I need satellite coverage, real time, and I need you to make some calls. It's time to wake up some old ghosts as night fell over the town." More black SUVs arrived, professional mercenaries mixed with wild wolves, members setting up checkpoints and patrol routes. They were preparing for war, but they were preparing for the wrong kind of fight in the basement of the Lighthouse Diner. Sarah laid out the revised plan to her core team. The Iron Veterans would play their part, making noise and drawing attention. Martinez and Cooper would work their remaining law enforcement contacts. Betty's evidence would be their insurance policy, but the operation would come from the shadows, executed by people who specialized in the impossible. Tomorrow, Sarah told them, Cross arrives with his precious list and his international contacts. He's expecting to find a town under his complete control, but he's going to find out what happens when you underestimate the wrong people. Outside, thunder rolled across the bay, and a storm was coming to Lighthouse Cove by the time it was over. Nothing would be the same. Sarah's phone lit up with a series of encrypted messages. The first was from Mike. He said, "Ghost team activated. 6 operators, all former teammates. They're yours if you want them." The second was from an unknown number. It said, "Commander, Ghost lead here. Team is in position awaiting your orders." The third was from Stone. He said, "My people report Cross is advanced. The team is doing recon. They're thorough and professional. These aren't regular muscle." Sarah gathered her team closer. "Listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room in about 6 hours. Cross and his people are going to execute what they think is a perfect takeover of this town. They have the numbers, the weapons, and the tactical advantage. What they don't have is understanding of who they're really fighting. She spread out a detailed map of Lighthouse Cove. They're watching the streets and the obvious approaches. They've got eyes on law enforcement. Iron veterans are keeping an eye on anyone who might resist, but they're not watching the shadows. That's where we're going to hurt them. The Ghost team, Martinez said quietly. Sarah nodded. 6 operators, all former special operations people who know how to move without being seen. They've been in position since yesterday, mapping patrol routes and identifying vulnerabilities. Cooper studied the map. Even with them, we're still outnumbered. Numbers don't win fights, Sarah replied. Position, timing, and initiative do. Besides, we're not looking to win a straight fight. Betty spread out her notebook. I've marked every business they're using to launder money, every warehouse where they store contraband. If we hit them all at once, it'll be chaos. Stone finished. They won't know where to focus their response. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Mike, the final satellite pass shows Cross's convoy is mobilizing multiple vehicles and heavy security. Eta 0600. Perfect, Sarah said. That gives us 5 hours to get everything in place. Stone, get your people ready. Martinez, Cooper, coordinate with the Ghost team's recon. Betty, the older woman, smiled. Stay out of sight and let the professionals do their thing. Sarah said, I need you to open the diner at the usual time. Just act normal. Cross's people will be watching, so try not to do anything different. They'll know something's wrong if they see anything out of the ordinary. Betty straightened her apron. Honey, I've been serving coffee to criminals for years while gathering evidence against them. I think I can handle one more morning. It was a scary situation. The rain was pouring down as enemy operators moved through the dark streets. Their night vision equipment gave them confidence, but Sarah knew it would also be their weakness. They were looking through a digital green haze while her people knew every shadow by heart. Sarah whispered into her radio. She was giving the all-clear to the first team moving into the kill zone. 20 operators were moving in 4-man cells. They had heavy weapons and demo gear. They were stone iron veterans. They were ready to create chaos. On your mark, Sarah watched through her scope as the enemy's lead element approached. Lighthouse Diner, they moved well, covering angles, checking corners. They were professional but dangerous. They knew what they were doing, but it was still a bit unpredictable. Phase 2, she ordered across town. The iron veterans roared to life, their motorcycles thundering through the streets in what appeared to be a panicked evacuation. The enemy operators reacted exactly as trained, splitting their forces to investigate the new threat. Ghost 2, report second convoy moving to intercept the bikers. Martinez, now from her position at the old sheriff's office, Martinez triggered the prepared devices. The strategic transformers blew, plunging new sections of town into darkness. While illuminating others, the enemy's night vision equipment suddenly became a liability as they dealt with rapidly changing light conditions. Multiple targets were disoriented. Ghost 3 confirmed that they were moving to engage. The first shots were silent suppressed weapons. They were taking out key targets in the enemy's command structure. By the time they realized they were under attack, the Ghost team had already melted away to new positions. Commander Mike's voice came through her earpiece. Third convoy is holding back their commander. He's realized something's wrong, she said. Good, replied Sarah. That's what the package is for. Transmitted a burst of encrypted data, the fake list from a location near the center of town as predicted. The enemy electronic warfare team picked up the transmission, but they didn't stand a chance. Ghost lead reported all units converging on the transmission source. Sarah smiled grimly. Phase 3, all units execute at will. The storm above provided perfect cover as the real battle began. The Iron veterans abandoned their decoy run instead, launching coordinated attacks on the enemy's vehicles. Ghost team operators picked off anyone who tried to call for backup or establish a command position. But it was the townspeople who it was a wild ride. Every door that looked like an escape route led to a prepared ambush. Every shadow concealed a defender who knew exactly where to shoot. The enemy operators found themselves fighting phantoms. They never were able to establish control or consolidate their forces. Commander Stone's voice was tight with controlled excitement. They're falling back to preset rally points. No, Sarah ordered. They're falling back to where we want them. The fake list data had led them straight into the town's old warehouse district. It was a maze of buildings rigged with motion sensors and prepared firing positions. The enemy operators were ready for them. They looked for cover and found themselves being herded into smaller and smaller spaces. They were down to just a few people now. Ghost team status: 15 targets eliminated, 20 plus wounded. The rest are contained in the warehouse sector. Sarah switched channels. Mike, what's the third convoy doing? Finally, they were moving in. Their commander must have realized his advanced teams are being decimated. Perfect, Martinez. Initiate the final sequence. The remaining street lights were finally switching off completely, plunging the town into total darkness. The storm above was intensifying. Rain was hammering down as lightning split the sky through her thermal scope. Sarah watched the remaining enemy forces. They clustered together in the warehouses, following the advice they'd been given to consolidate and establish a defensive position. Instead, they were doing exactly what she'd planned. All units, please be advised. Phase 4 is active. I'll say it again. Phase 4 is weapons-free. The remaining enemy operators never saw it coming. The Ghost Team snipers took out their leadership, and the Iron veterans were cut off from their escape routes. The townspeople, led by Cooper and Martinez, maintained a constant barrage that kept them pinned down. But it was Sarah who delivered the final blow, moving through the rain like a shadow as she approached the main. The warehouse was where the enemy commander had set up his last stand. He was the man who'd led the third convoy and held back, thinking he was smarter than the rest. Well, it was time to show him just how wrong he was. All units, hold your position. She gave the order, and her personal lightning flashed again as she moved toward the warehouse entrance. The real fight was about to begin. Through her night vision, Sarah counted 6 heat signatures on the upper level. There was the enemy commander and his remaining elite team. Their voices carried a familiar cadence, like former Special Operations Navy SEALs who'd gone mercenary. Commander, she thought. Mike's voice came through her earpiece with an idea about their leader, Marcus. She was worried about him because he was in Singapore. Sarah's heart started to beat faster. She remembered that he had been there the day her teammates died. He was working for a different contractor. He disappeared before anyone could ask him about his role in the operation. So now Marcus's voice was echoing through the warehouse. The famous Commander Hayes had been a long time since Singapore. It hadn't been long enough. Marcus was still hiding behind civilian casualties. This was just like Singapore. There was a burst of gunfire. She heard rounds impacting where she had been seconds before. These weren't random shots. Her friend Marcus's team was trying to hurt her. Singapore was just business for Cross. He called out just like this, and he'd say, "Hey, just thinking out loud, but do you really think your little town can stand against what's coming?" The wild wolves were just the beginning. The other forces were contained and neutralized. The Ghost Team was on the other side. The Iron veterans were running cleanup. They were just targets remaining in your building. Hear that, Cross? Sarah replied. Your backup isn't coming. More gunfire. More controlled this time. They were getting frustrated. They made mistakes. 2 operators moved to flank her position, but Sarah was already gone. You don't get it, do you, Cross? His voice was closer now. It was the wild wolves. The organization wasn't the head of the snake. We are. That list contains everything. Every operation. Every contract. Every killer for hire. With that data, we control it all. Wrong, Sarah replied. Her voice echoed. You don't control anything, not anymore. Oh, what a surprise. The first operator never saw her coming. A quick strike to the throat, and another to the temple. So silent and efficient. The second tried to radio for help, but received only static. The town's radio jammers were still active, cutting off all communication. Well, that's over now. Cross called out. Your men are dead or captured. Your operation is blown. Surrender now like your team surrendered in Singapore. The taunt was meant to enrage her, but it brought perfect clarity through the smoke and strobing lights. Sarah moved like a ghost. The 3rd and 4th operators fell to precise shots. The 5th managed to get off a burst of fire before Sarah's knife found his throat. Then it was just her and Cross. You know what your problem is, Hayes. His voice was behind her now. You still think like a soldier, honor, duty, protecting the innocent. The world doesn't work that way anymore. You're wrong. Sarah turned, facing him. That's exactly how it works. You just forgot they moved simultaneously. Cross was good, one of the best. His strikes were precise and powerful. But Sarah had something he didn't. A reason to win that went beyond money or power. The fight was brutal and close. Bones cracked and blood flowed. Cross landed a crushing blow to her ribs, but Sarah was ready for it, countering with a strike that shattered his knee. She was still clear-headed and in control, even as Cross stumbled. Sarah saw her opening and went for it, using the same move she'd used countless times in training. It was the one they taught every soldier, and it was for Singapore, she said and struck. Cross's eyes widened as he fell. His last words were barely a whisper. "You don't know what you've done." Sarah stood over him, breathing hard. "Actually, I do," she said. Mike was uploading now. Sarah spoke into her radio, standing over Cross's unconscious form. The real list was downloaded from their servers while we were chasing our decoy, every name, every operation, and we were sending everything to every major intelligence agency in the world. The storm outside was finally passing, and dawn was breaking over Lighthouse Cove. Sarah could see the rest of Cross's team being rounded up by the Ghost operator and Iron veterans. The wild wolves who hadn't fled were surrendering, and they realized their protection had evaporated. Commander Ghost Lead's voice crackled through her radio. "We've secured the port facilities, and we found something interesting. The shipping manifests, the bank records, the political payoffs. It goes way beyond weapons smuggling. How deep state level, at least maybe higher." Cross wasn't lying about one thing. This was bigger than the wild wolves. Martin, as his voice joined the channel, said, "Sarah, we've got movement at City Hall. Wilson and half the council are trying to leave town. Cooper's team has them contained. Keep them there. The FBI will. I'd like to speak with them, please." Sarah keyed her radio again. "I'd like to know what's going on, Stone. How are things on the streets? My boys are running security with the remaining deputies. The town is locked down tight. No one is coming in or going out without us knowing." Sarah did one final sweep of the warehouse. She was gathering any intelligence they might have missed in Crosses. Jacket found a phone with multiple encrypted channels and a small notebook filled with codes, more evidence for the federal authorities to unravel. Betty's voice came unexpectedly over the radio. They'd given her a spare unit to stay in contact. "Honey, you might want to get back to the diner. We've got company hostile. Well, unless the FBI has gotten a lot more aggressive since I last checked, I'd say they're friendly. There are about a dozen agents in suits looking very official. Their boss says she knows you, Rodriguez." Sarah smiled. Special Agent Rodriguez had been her contact during the Singapore operation. "Tell her I'll be there in 10. Betty put some coffee on. It was going to be a long morning. The scene at the Lighthouse Diner was almost surreal. FBI agents mingled with Iron veterans, members while deputies chatted with Ghost team operators who'd already changed into civilian clothes. Betty moved through it all with pots of coffee and plates of her famous apple pie. She was maintaining a normal air despite the extraordinary circumstances. Commander Hayes Rodriguez greeted her with a professional nod. Or should I say the retired commander, who somehow managed to expose a multinational criminal enterprise from a small-town diner, just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Rodriguez smiled and said, "I suppose the highly trained operators who helped take down Cross's organization just happened to be passing through." Stone, who had just walked in, laughed and said, "Sometimes the best way to hide is in plain sight. Nobody looks twice at another motorcycle club. We've been tracking Cross for years." Rodriguez continued spreading files across the table. "Oh, the counter could never get close enough. Then you show up, start trouble with a local gang, and within a week, his entire operation falls apart." I'd love to explain that Sarah accepted a cup of coffee from Betty. Sometimes bullies need to learn they picked the wrong target. The list you transmitted is already causing waves. Criminal networks worldwide are scrambling, corrupt officials are resigning, and we've got enough evidence to take down organizations we didn't even know existed. Cooper joined them, looking tired but satisfied. Wilson and the council are singing like canaries. It turns out they've been on Cross's payroll for years, helping him set up shell companies and looking the other way while he built his operation. The Wild Wolves. Sarah asked most of the rank and file to come in for a chat. "They're in custody now." Martinez reported that Spike and his inner circle tried to run, but the Iron veterans intercepted them at the county line. "They're feeling chatty too, especially after we showed them the evidence Betty collected." Betty smiled innocently. Amazing what people will say when they think the old diner owner isn't paying attention. Rodriguez, she gave a little shake of her head, a smile playing on her lips. A retired Army commander, a motorcycle club full of Spec Ops veterans, a sheriff's deputy, and a diner owner with a secret notebook. It was the kind of motley crew that could only have come from a bad joke. But sometimes the best operations came from unlikely alliances. "Speaking of operations," Sarah replied, her voice low, "that Ghost team of yours, any chance they're interested in more work? We've got other criminal enterprises that could use their attention. You'd have to ask them. She smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. If you could find them, the ghost operators had already. They vanished without a trace, but their absence didn't last long. They returned to their normal lives until the next time they were needed. From her vantage point at the diner, Sarah could see Lighthouse Cove coming back to life. The morning sun revealed some damage from the night's fighting, but nothing that couldn't be fixed. Most importantly, she saw the townspeople walking the streets without fear, holding their heads high. Betty asked, "What happens now?" Cooper replied, "We rebuild. We rebuild proper law enforcement and legitimate business development." He then refilled coffee cups. "Let's get this done right already. I've been getting calls from neighboring towns." Stone added, "It seems like the word is spreading about what happened here. Other communities are dealing with similar problems and are looking for help." Sarah raised an eyebrow, looking for help or looking for hope. "Both are probably good," Martinez answered. "People need to know they can stand up to bullies. They don't have to live in fear." "If they need more than just hope," Rodriguez asked pointedly, "what about this team?" Sarah looked around the diner at Betty's quiet strength, Cooper's dedication, Martinez's determination, and Stone's professionalism. A team that had come together by chance, but had proven more effective than any official task force, she said with a smile. Finally, one way or another, her phone buzzed with a message from Mike. Satellite tracking shows similar operations setting up in 3 other coastal towns. Ghost team standing by if needed. Sarah smiled. The fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. But this time, she wasn't facing it alone. She had a team, a purpose, and a home worth protecting. "Betty," she called out, "better stock up on coffee. Something tells me your diner is going to be busy." "I'm going to be pretty busy, but I'll be here if you need me. I've got my coffee pot ready to go, and my notebooks are always full of blank pages. I'm the one who's got to keep track of what's really going on in these small towns." The FBI agents started working with the local police to process the prisoners. They'd have to collect evidence for days and weeks. There were weapons caches, financial records, encrypted communications, and Betty's detailed notebooks, which documented years of criminal activity. The interrogations were already yielding results. Rodriguez informed them of Cross's organization. "It turns out that Cross had his fingers in a lot of pies that we never even suspected. Port authorities, customs officials, judges, you name it. This is going to have a knock-on effect all the way to the state capital. Maybe it'll make others think twice before trying to take over small towns," replied Sarah. The photos were really eye-opening. "It's amazing how quickly things can fall apart." Stone added with a smile. "All because they thought a small town would be an easy target." Sarah's phone lit up with another series of messages. Various intelligence agencies were requesting briefings. Other law enforcement departments were asking for assistance. Mike reported increased chatter among criminal networks as they scrambled to distance themselves from Cross's operation. "We're going to need a bigger diner," Betty joked, watching the steady stream of officials coming through her doors. "What we need is," Sarah corrected him, saying, "Cross's organization wasn't the only one out there. Others will try to fill the vacuum, but let them try." Martinez said firmly, "We'll be waiting." Rodriguez gathered her files and said, "I need to head back to DC to brief the director, but this isn't over. We'll need your help with the fallout from this." Sarah nodded and said, "You know where to find us." As the morning wore on, the diner became a command center of sorts. Maps spread across tables showed other potential targets, while Betty's coffee-fueled strategy sessions between law enforcement veterans. "And intelligence officials, you know what the real victory is?" Sarah asked, watching the activity. "It's not just taking down Cross. It's showing other towns they don't have to be victims. They can fight back, and they don't have to fight alone." Stone added. Sarah's phone buzzed one final time. Mike's message was brief. 3 more towns were reporting suspicious activity. It was the same pattern as Cross's operation. The ghost team was awaiting orders. Sarah looked at her team, ready to help some neighbors. The answers came without hesitation. Martinez checked her weapon. Stone grinned. Cooper nodded, and Betty just smiled and started brewing more coffee outside. The sun had fully risen over Lighthouse Cove, and the storm had passed, leaving behind a sky as clear as Sarah's conscience. Cross and his operation were finished, but more importantly, something new had been born. A network of people dedicated to protecting small towns from those who would prey on them. The wild wolves had made a fatal mistake walking into the Lighthouse Diner that day. They'd thought they were intimidating a lone woman, but they'd helped create something they never could have imagined. They were expecting a force that would change the fate of small towns up and down the coast. And somewhere out there, other bullies were about to learn the same lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous person isn't the one making threats, but the quiet one, drinking coffee just waiting for someone to make a mistake. 3 months after the takedown of Cross's operation, the Lighthouse Diner had transformed. The basement, once a simple storage space, had been renovated into what Betty jokingly called the Situation Room. This was a secure meeting place for Sarah and her expanding network. Sarah sat at her usual booth, reviewing reports from Stone's teams about suspicious activity along the coast. Martinez, now officially appointed as the new sheriff after Cooper's retirement, joined her with fresh coffee. "I've got something interesting," Martinez said, sliding a file across the table. "Remember those warehouse raids last week? We found documentation linking 3 state officials to Cross's old network. They're scrambling since the list went public." Sarah's attention shifted to the TV mounted in the corners, showing footage of another high profile. "Arrest a weapons dealer with connections to Cross taken down in a neighboring state by unknown operators." She smiled, recognizing Ghost Team's handiwork. "Your friends have been busy," Martinez commented. "I just see effective law enforcement at work." The diner's door chimed as Cooper entered with Stone and Rodriguez, all looking serious. "What's up?" Sarah asked. Rodriguez placed a laptop on the table, showing surveillance photos. "Remember how we thought Cross's operation was just about weapons? Turns out that was just the surface. We found evidence of human trafficking routes using the same corridors." As the weapons shipment involved multiple small towns, Cooper added, local officials bought off. It sounded familiar to Sarah, who studied the photos. She could see the pattern clearly. The same methods Cross had used were now being employed by others trying to fill the power vacuum. "How many towns were involved?" "At least 6, Stone replied. They were all small, isolated, vulnerable, just like Lighthouse Cove was. Betty appeared with more coffee and her infamous apple pie. She suggested that someone should do something about that. Rodriguez said the federal task force is being put together in a very informal way. They're looking for someone to coordinate ground operations. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, you recommended someone, right?" Stone interjected. "We all did. The Iron veterans need direction for their more specialized operations. The Ghost team operates better with familiar command. Having a sheriff special advisor provides useful cover. Plus," Betty added, "you need something to do between teaching those self-defense classes." Sarah had come up with the idea of offering defense classes to help the townspeople protect themselves, build confidence, and strengthen the community. The waiting list was now 3 months long. "What about here?" she asked. "This town still needs protecting." Martinez smiled. "We've learned a few things besides. You won't be far away. We're just expanding the definition of home territory." Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Mike. "Got moved. I'm on those trafficking cases. Time sensitive. Team standing by for your call." She looked around at her unlikely family. Betty's quiet strength, Martinez's determined leadership, Cooper's steady wisdom, Stone's tactical expertise, and Rodriguez's official backing. They're all part of something larger now, a network dedicated to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. "You know what the real problem was with Cross and operations like his," Sarah said, her eyes twinkling as she studied the surveillance photos. "They prey on towns like Lighthouse Cove because they think small communities are weak. They mistake kindness for weakness and quiet for cowardice. They forget that small towns are built on community," Betty added with a smile. Refilling coffee cups on people looking out for each other is exactly what she was talking about. Cross, however, thought he could control this town through fear and corruption. He never understood that real strength doesn't come from having the most guns or the most money. It comes from people standing together, just like Betty said. Martinez finished. Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Ghost. The lead team had assembled, multiple targets had been identified, and they were waiting for her command outside a group of Iron veterans. As they rode past on patrol, the presence of the soldiers was now a comfort to the townspeople, rather than a source of fear. Looking out of the diner windows, Sarah could see Lighthouse Cove thriving, with businesses reopening and families walking without fear. The community was returning, stronger than ever. "You know what I learned in the Army?" Sarah said, looking at her team. "The most effective operations aren't always about having the biggest force or the most advanced equipment. Sometimes it's about having the right people in the right place, working together. For the right reasons. And now, other towns need that same lesson." Rodriguez added. Sarah nodded in agreement, and his people thought small towns were easy targets. They were wrong about Lighthouse Cove, and we're going to make sure they're wrong about these other towns too. Expanding operations will be complicated, Stone warned. We'll need more resources, more coordination. The good thing is, we've got a diner with a secure basement. He smiled, and plenty of coffee. The even better thing is, we've got people who know how to move in the shadows. Martinez added, nodding to where a ghost team member sat quietly in the corner, blending in perfectly with the morning crowd. Sarah's phone lit up with multiple messages. Mike's satellite coverage confirmed that the next operation was a go. Ghost lead teams were in position at 3 locations. Stone and Iron veterans were ready to move. Rodriguez's federal backup was standing by, off the books. Sarah, she said, opening her laptop, let's show these towns what we know about them. Let's help them like we helped Lighthouse Cove. Betty placed a fresh slice of pie in the center of the table. Front of her, just remember, honey, no matter how far you roam, you've always got a home base here, and my coffee pot's always on, and my notebook's got plenty of blank pages, she added with a wink. Sarah smiled. The fight wasn't over. It was evolving, growing, but now she had something she'd never had before. A true team, a clear purpose, and a home worth fighting for. Cross had thought he was building an empire, but he'd actually helped create something far more powerful. A network of people dedicated to protecting the vulnerable. And standing up to bullies wherever they appear. All right, Sarah said, addressing her team. Let's get to work. We've got some towns to save. The sun was setting over Lighthouse Cove when Mike's emergency alert came through. A major operation was forming in Cedar Grove. The pattern matched Cross's playbook. Multiple hostile forces were converging. Local law enforcement was compromised. Sarah studied the satellite imagery Mike had sent. Cedar Grove was 3 hours north. It was another small coastal town. It was similar to Lighthouse Cove. The population was 5,000. 000 isolated vulnerable perfect target for criminal enterprises looking to establish new territory. Sarah asked during the emergency briefing in the Lighthouse Diner basement. Rodriguez pulled up files on the screen. The town's been seeing increased criminal activity over the past month, he said. A motorcycle gang called the Night Raiders moved in first. They started with the usual protection racket. Now we're seeing the same signs we saw here. There are corrupt officials and suspicious port activity. There's also unexplained wealth. They're following Cross's template exactly. Stone observed. They're using the gang as cover while they set up the real operation, he added. Martinez pointed to the surveillance photos. These aren't regular gang members, he said. You can see their movement patterns. They're using professional military training. They're like the Wild Wolves, and they're using the local resistance, just like Cross used the Wild Wolves and the local resistance. Sarah asked, and Cooper replied, Sheriff, there is a clean but isolated mayor in the Raiders. Pocket towns are divided and scared, just like we were. Betty, who'd been quietly taking notes, spoke up and got a call from a diner owner, Mary Prescott. She's been gathering evidence, just like I did. She says things are coming to a head, and they're moving something big through the port tomorrow night. Sarah's phone buzzed again. The advance team got a lead on the enemy, and it looks like there are at least 40 of them, well-equipped and ready for a fight. Sarah said, let's give them more than they expect. Stone and Iron veterans can be ready in 2 hours and 15 minutes. Martinez, I can spare 6 deputies, all trained. In the new protocols, Rodriguez adjusted her jacket, offering unofficial federal backing as always. I've got 3 teams of agents who'd love to accidentally be in the right place at the right time. Sarah nodded, formulating the plan. They're expecting conventional resistance, local law enforcement, and maybe rival gangs. We'll give them what they're expecting. Let them think they've got everything under control. Meanwhile, the ghost team will hit them from the shadows. I've already contacted Mary and told her to be ready, but to stay safe. Her evidence will be crucial later. I've already done that, honey. She's smarter than they think. She's just like someone else I know. Sarah spread out a map of Cedar Grove. They've got numbers and equipment, but we've got something better, experience. We know their playbook because we've seen it before. More importantly, we know how to beat it. Her phone lit up with messages from the team. Satellite coverage confirmed it all. Monitoring package, ghost lead, target packages identified, awaiting go order, Stone Iron veteran rolling, ETA 3 hours. Martinez, Depues mobile moving in civilian vehicles. Remember, Sarah, you were so right. These people think small towns are easy targets. They think they can walk in by a few officials, intimidate the locals, and take control. Well, they're about to learn the same lesson that Cross learned. Speaking of lessons, Betty added, Mary says the night raiders have been pressuring local businesses and putting people around them in danger. It sounds like they need a reminder about picking the wrong targets. Sarah smiled, then let's give them one. The next few hours were a blur of activity, but they'll remember it all. The Iron veterans departed in small groups, taking different routes to avoid attention. Martinez's deputies moved out, disguised as civilian traffic. The Ghost team reported their final positions around Cedar Grove. Even Betty's network of diner owners along the coast was activated, providing safe houses and gathering intelligence. As Sarah geared up for the operation, she looked around the basement at her core team. What started as a simple act of standing up to bullies had evolved into something much more. They were a specialized unit dedicated to protecting small towns from those who would prey on them. Remember Lighthouse Cove. She told them, remember how it felt to be afraid, thinking you were alone against something too big to fight. Cedar Grove feels that way right now, tonight. We're here to show them they're not alone. We're here to show them that small towns can fight back. Her phone buzzed. One last time, multiple vehicles are entering Cedar Grove. Heavy weapons, professional operators. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon. Good, Sarah replied. Because so are we. Rodriguez checked her weapon. You know, when I was assigned to investigate Cross's operation, I never expected to end up part of a secret task force protecting small towns. Betty said with a warm smile, handing out fresh coffee and travel mugs. Sometimes you find your true calling in the last place you'd expect. Mount up, Sarah ordered. The Ghost team is in position. Iron veterans are nearing the target. Martinez's deputies are in place. It's time to show. These folks are a lot more than they seem. Don't underestimate small towns. Sarah thought about how much had changed since that morning in the Lighthouse Diner when two bikers thought they could intimidate a quiet woman drinking coffee. They'd started a chain of events that would reshape not just Lighthouse Cove, but also the lives of many. But small towns up and down the coast are ready to stand up to anyone who tries to intimidate them. Martinez asked, checking her tactical gear. She was ready to go, more than ready. Let's show the night raiders why you should always be careful who you pick a fight with. As the engines roared to life, the team prepared to move out. The team was ready to head out. The night was clear, with stars shining brightly over Lighthouse Cove. Somewhere north of Cedar Grove, the folks there were about to learn that they weren't alone in their fight. And the people trying to take over their town were about to learn a harsh lesson about underestimating small towns and the people who protected them. The approach to Cedar Grove was executed with military precision. Sarah's team moved in stages, careful to avoid drawing attention. Ghost team operators had already mapped the night raiders' patrol routes and secured positions, identifying vulnerabilities in their defenses. Ghost lead status, Sarah whispered. As they got closer to the town limits, she heard on her radio that the enemy forces were gathering around the port area. It seemed like the main group was preparing for a big shipment. There were also secondary forces patrolling the town center. They'd surrounded the sheriff's office, according to Stone. My scouts had reported that there were heavy weapons, professional operators, and even gang members mixed in. They were expecting trouble, but they were looking in the wrong direction. See, Sarah checked the satellite feed on her tablet. The night raiders had set up checkpoints at all the major roads into town, but they'd left the old logging trails unwatched. That was an amateur mistake. Martinez, did you get the message? Affirmative. The deputies are spread throughout town, all in civilian cover, ready to move on your signal. Rodriguez checked her secure phone. The FBI teams are standing by, disguised as fishing boats offshore. They'll move in once we have evidence of criminal activity. Sarah's phone lit up with a message from Mary Prescott, the local diner owner. The owner of the establishment just came in with a large group, all armed and trying not to show it. Their leaders are meeting with the mayor in my back room. I got the recorder running just like Betty showed me. Good girl, Betty. She also said she was monitoring communications from the mobile command center they'd set up in a modified RV. She's got ice in her veins, that one. Sarah studied the tactical display from the night raiders had turned Cedar Grove into a fortress. They'd made the same mistake Cross had. They were preparing for a conventional assault and didn't realize their greatest threat would come from within. All units, execute Phase 1. Sarah ordered. A carefully planned distraction began. The Iron veterans launched their signature loud approach from the east, drawing attention. Martinez's deputies, positioned in civilian vehicles, created a traffic jam at the main checkpoint. Ghost team operators triggered false alarms at several warehouses they're splitting. Sarah watched through her scope as the enemy commanders tried to coordinate their response. Their radio communications had been intercepted by Mike's equipment, and it was so interesting to see how confused they were. There were even some unknown riders approaching from the east. One voice crackled, and it seemed like there were multiple civilian vehicles blocking Route 1. There was also a possible breach at Warehouse 3, and no alarms at all locations. It looked like they were losing control of their security perimeter. Stone observed with satisfaction, and Sarah keyed her radio phase. "2 Ghost Team, you have weapons free on designated targets," she said. "Stone, begin your run. Martinez, light them up." The real attack began with incredible precision. The Ghost Team operators did a fantastic job of eliminating key enemy commanders with suppressed weapons. The Iron Veterans' distraction turned into a genuine assault on the night. The Raiders' defenses were no match for them. Martinez's deputies emerged from their civilian covers, targeting specific enemies identified by their intel. Mary reports that the leaders are panicking, but Betty relayed that they're trying to call in reinforcements. "Unfortunately, our jammers are blocking communications, but there's still plenty of time for Phase 3. Sarah moved forward with her personal team, a mix of Ghost operators and Iron Veterans. They headed for the port facility where, according to intel, the Night Raiders were preparing to receive a major shipment. The intel they had was that the Night Raiders were getting ready to receive a big shipment. Commander Ghost Lead's voice was tight with controlled excitement. "You need to see this. It's at the Northwest Warehouse, the main storage area." Sarah changed course and went to the location. She moved silently through the chaos of battle inside the warehouse. There she found what the Night Raiders had been hiding: dozens of shipping containers filled with weapons, drugs, and detailed logs of criminal operations. "Just like Cross," she muttered. "They're not just taking over the town. They're setting up a distribution hub." Sarah Martinez's voice came over the line urgently. "We've got movement at the diner. The leaders are trying to run, but it's not going to happen." Sarah switched channels. Ghosts 3 and 4 converge on Mary's diner. Stone cut off their escape routes. "Betty, tell Mary to get out of there." The Night Raiders leader made it 3 steps out of the diner's back door before finding himself surrounded by Ghost Team operators. Oh dear. The mayor was trying to slip away in the confusion, but he was caught by Martinez's deputies. Commander Rodriguez called to say that they've got enough evidence that FBI teams are moving in. Sarah watched as the carefully constructed operation fell apart. The Night Raiders' leadership was eliminated, and their plans were in chaos. They began surrendering. The professional operators, realizing they'd been outmaneuvered, tried to flee but found every escape route blocked, just like in Lighthouse Cove. Cooper observed through the radio that they never saw it coming because they made the same mistakes. Sarah replied that they thought they could take over a small town through fear and intimidation. They never understood that small towns have their own strength. As the sun rose over Cedar Grove, the full scope of their victory became clear. The Night Raiders were in custody, their criminal enterprise was exposed, the corrupted officials were being arrested, and most importantly, the townspeople were as they emerged from their homes. Mary was serving free coffee to everyone, and Betty reported with satisfaction that it was a new day for Cedar Grove. Sarah smiled, remembering similar scenes in Lighthouse Cove months ago. She made sure she knew she wasn't alone anymore, and that no small town is alone. As she looked around, her phone buzzed with a message from Mike. He detected a similar pattern in 3 other coastal towns. A Ghost Team was standing by, and it looked like our work wasn't done, Martinez observed. Sarah checked her weapon, already thinking about the next operation. It'd never be done, but that was okay. Someone has to stand up for these towns and remind the bullies why they should be careful who they pick fights with. After all, as Betty always says, sometimes the most dangerous person isn't the one with the biggest gang or the most weapons. Sarah finished watching the FBI boats approach the harbor. It's the quiet woman, drinking coffee in a small town. The diner is just waiting for someone to make the mistake of causing trouble. 6 months after the takedown of Cross's operation, Sarah's network had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. The basement of the Lighthouse Diner had become the nerve center for operations protecting small towns all along the coast. Betty's The Wall of Intelligence had expanded to include maps, photos, and evidence collected from multiple operations. "We've got movement," Martinez announced, entering the basement command center. "Remember those shipping manifests we found in Cedar Grove? They match up perfectly with activities in Millbrook Harbor." Sarah looked up from her tactical display, her eyes twinkling. "What's the pattern?" she asked. "Same as Lighthouse Cove and Cedar Grove. Small gang moves in first, starts pushing people around. Then the professionals arrive, looking to set up shipping operations. Stone, who'd been monitoring communications, added his report. Gang calls themselves the Harbor Kings. Oh dear. It looks like our local law enforcement has already been compromised. And the mayor's son just bought a new yacht. He shouldn't be able to afford it. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore. Cooper observed that it's like they're following a playbook. Rodriguez confirmed that they've identified a pattern after we shut down. Cross's operation has caused his associates to scatter, but they're each trying to rebuild his empire piece by piece. It's a challenge. Small towns, corrupt officials, and legitimate businesses as fronts. Oh my! Sarah's phone buzzed with an update from Ghost. Lead surveillance confirms heavy weapon shipments moving through Millbrook Harbor. It's a lot to take in. Teams are on site, and they're building something big. How many times do they have to learn this? Betty wondered, pouring fresh coffee. Small towns aren't easy targets anymore. They haven't learned, Sarah replied. They still think Lighthouse Cove and Cedar Grove were flukes. They don't understand what they're really facing, Martinez. Sarah pulled up the satellite imagery and saw that the Ghost teams had identified 3 main compounds. The Harbor Kings were using old fishing warehouses as cover. The local police chiefs had been ordered to stay away, just like Wilson did here. Cooper noted the difference, and Stone added, "We know their moves now. We can get ahead of them." Sarah's phone lit up with a new message. Mike sent a series of messages, and the facial recognition software matched 3 former Cross associates in Millbrook. The Ghost team is ready to lead target packages and is in position. The Iron Veterans Scout reports that the Harbor Patrol has been bought off. There's been no official response yet. They think they're being clever, but Sarah thinks otherwise. She's studying the intel and using the same methods that worked for Cross. She's thinking that they can't be that clever if they're using the same methods. She wants to prove them wrong. Martinez asked to check her tactical gear. Sarah pulled up more satellite footage and looked at their patrol patterns. It seems like they're expecting resistance from local law enforcement or rival gangs. This is similar to what happened with the others. Oh, bless their hearts. They're preparing for the wrong kind of fight. Betty approached with a fresh pot of coffee and a knowing smile. She got a call from Millbrook's local diner owner, who says the Harbor Kings have been pressuring businesses and making examples of anyone who resists. It reminds me of some other bullies we dealt with. History is repeating itself. It's a shame, Cooper mused. But Sarah was quick to correct him, saying, "No, it's not history repeating. It's teaching a lesson." Rodriguez checked her secure phone. "FBI teams are ready, off the books as usual," she said. "The Ghost team is in position." Sarah asked, "Affirmative." 6 operators are spread through key locations. They've mapped every patrol route and identified weaknesses. "All security weaknesses," Iron Veteran Stone grinned. 20 riders ready to raise hell on your command, and Martinez with 10 deputies, all veterans of Cedar Grove. They know the playbook. Sarah stood, addressing her assembled team. These people think they're smart, following Cross's methods. They don't realize that's exactly why. Oh, they'll fail. We know their moves before they make them, and we know their weaknesses before they show them. She activated the main tactical display, showing Millbrook Harbor's layout. They're expecting the usual threats: local cops, rival gangs, maybe even a federal investigation. But what they're not expecting is us, a Ghost team that we can strike from anywhere. We're Iron veterans who know how to fight smarter, not just harder. We've got deputies trained in our methods, and most importantly, we've got a network of small towns ready to stand together. Betty added fresh intel from her diner network. Word is they're moving something big tomorrow night. It's some kind of demonstration to show other towns what happens if they resist. Perfect timing. Sarah smiled. Let's show them what happens when they mess with the wrong towns. She checked her own gear as her team prepared for deployment. Remember Lighthouse Cove, she told them. Remember Cedar Grove. Remember every small town these people thought. They could control people through fear and corruption. Tonight, we add Millbrook Harbor to that list. Her phone buzzed one final time. "Mike, multiple hostile forces are converging on Millbrook. Whatever they're planning, it's big." "Good luck," Sarah replied. "So is our response," as her team moved out. Sarah thought about that morning in the Lighthouse Diner. When 2 bikers thought they could intimidate their way to control, they'd started something they never expected. A network dedicated to protecting small towns from those who would prey on them was ready to teach some new bullies an old lesson. In her rifle, she always lets the Harbor Kings know why smart predators avoid small towns these days. Outside, engines roared to life as the team prepared to move. The night was clear, perfect for their operation. Somewhere out there, the Harbor Kings thought they were about to demonstrate their power. Instead, they were about to become another example of why you should never underestimate small towns or the quiet warriors who protected them. Betty watched them gear up, already preparing fresh coffee for their return. Something tells me Millbrook's going to have a different kind of demonstration tonight. They certainly will. I'm afraid it wasn't quite the kind the Harbor Kings were expecting. The approach to Millbrook Harbor was executed in complete silence under the cover of darkness. Sarah's team moved into position while Ghost Team operators had already infiltrated key locations throughout the port facility. Through her night vision goggles, Sarah could see the Harbor King security patrols moving with the false confidence of those who thought they were untouchable. Ghost lead status, Sarah whispered into her radio. All targets marked hostile. Force significantly larger than anticipated. Counting 50-plus operators. Military-grade equipment. They've got something. Big planned, Stone's voice crackled through the radio. Your scouts report heavy weapons being moved into position around the harbor. They're fortifying for something. Sarah studied the thermal imagery on her tactical display. The Harbor Kings had transformed 3 warehouses into fortified compounds with professional security teams are protecting what appears to be a massive weapons cache. Martinez, your people are in position. Affirmative, deputies are embedded throughout the town and ready on your signal. Rodriguez checked her secure phone. FBI teams are in place and disguised as fishing crews. We've got the harbor covered. Sarah's phone, Helen, the local diner owner, sent a message that lit up my phone with a big, bright hello. It said that a major meeting was happening right now, and that the Harbor Kings leadership was all present. They're planning some kind of demonstration tomorrow, and it looks like they're going to make an example of something. Betty's voice came through the command channel, just like they did in Lighthouse Cove. She always starts with a bang. Sarah kept a close eye on things through her scope as more vehicles arrived at the main warehouse. It seemed like the Harbor Kings were getting ready to show the town what they're made of, just like Cross had tried to do, just like the Night Raiders had attempted in Cedar Grove. All units execute PH-1, Sarah called out. In a carefully orchestrated chaos, the Iron Veterans launched diversionary attacks from multiple directions across Millbrook Harbor. Martinez's deputies, disguised as local traffic, created strategic blockades. The Ghost Team operators triggered the harbor's emergency systems, causing confusion among the enemy forces. They were splitting their response. The Ghost lead reported that the security teams were breaking formation, exactly as predicted. Sarah watched through her thermal scope as the enemy commanders tried to coordinate their forces. Their radio communications were intercepted by Mike's equipment, revealing growing panic, multiple breaches, and more. Hey, Sarah, I just heard that there are some unknown riders on the north side and that there's been a loss of communication with the outer teams. It seems like they're losing control. I know you're doing your best, but I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. Oh, and Stone observed that they're just like the others. I know you're trying your best, but I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. Betty relayed that they were heading for the emergency boats, but it didn't seem quite right. Ghost 3 and 4 cut off their escape, Ghost 3 reported. It's not happening, Ghost 4 replied. Stone blocked the marina. Rodriguez, it's time to bring in your teams. The Harbor Kings leaders made it halfway to their escape boats before finding themselves surrounded by Ghost operators. The professional security teams, realizing they'd been outmaneuvered, tried to mount a defense, but found themselves caught between the Iron Veterans and the FBI assault teams. Commander Ghost Lead's voice was urgent. You need to see what's in the main warehouse. Sarah moved quickly through the chaos of battle, entering the warehouse through a side entrance inside. She made her way through the warehouse, entering through a side entrance. Inside, she found what the Harbor Kings had been preparing, enough weapons and ammunition to arm a small army, along with detailed plans for taking over other coastal towns. Just as we thought, she muttered. They were planning to expand. Sarah Martinez called urgently. We've got movement. At the town hall, it looks like some officials are trying to quietly disappear. Ghost 5 and 6 intercept, but no one leaves town until we've confirmed their involvement. The battle for Millbrook Harbor lasted less than an hour, but it'll be felt for years to come. The Harbor Kings, their leadership captured, and there the operations were exposed and collapsed completely. Their professional security teams found themselves outmatched and surrendered to FBI forces as dawn broke over the harbor. Sarah watched as federal agents processed the scene. Local residents who'd lived in fear for months emerged to witness their town's liberation, just like Lighthouse Cove. Cooper observed that they learn, but Sarah corrected him, saying they just learn the wrong lessons. They see towns like this as weak and isolated, but they never understand that small communities have their own strength. Her phone buzzed with a message from Mike. Similar operations had been identified in 2 more coastal towns. Ghost team ready. It looks like we're not done yet, Martinez noted. Sarah checked her weapon, already thinking about the next operation. We'll always be here as long as there are people who think they can prey on small towns. We'll be here to prove them wrong and remind them, Betty added through the radio. Sometimes the most dangerous person isn't the one with the biggest gang or the most guns. Sarah agreed, watching the sun rise over Millbrook Harbor. It's the quiet ones who decide that enough is enough. They're the ones who stand up and fight back. The town was coming back to life. The Harbor Kings were back. They were gone. Their attempt to build a criminal empire had fallen apart, just like those who'd tried before them. But there were other towns out there, waiting for the same help and the same hope that Lighthouse Cove had found that morning. 2 bikers had made the mistake of picking the wrong target, but they were ready to save another town. Martinez asked, checking her gear. Sarah smiled, thinking of that morning in the Lighthouse Diner. A long time ago, someone had to be ready because these bullies needed to know why they should be careful who they pick fights with. Betty added that they should always think twice before causing trouble in a small town. 1 year after the confrontation that started it all in the Lighthouse Diner, Sarah stood at her usual window booth, watching the morning fog roll in from the ocean. The town had changed in ways she never expected. Lighthouse Cove had become so much more than just a quiet coastal community. It had become a symbol of hope for small towns everywhere. Betty approached with fresh coffee, just like she had that fateful morning. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, smiling. "Just thinking about how it all started." Sarah replied. 2 bikers who thought they could intimidate a diner owner found an army instead. Betty smiled, but her next words were interrupted by. Sarah's phone buzzed with the latest intelligence briefing from Mike. In the past year, their network had done some amazing work. They'd disrupted criminal operations in 12 coastal towns, dismantled 3 major trafficking rings, and exposed dozens of corrupt officials. The Ghost team had become legendary among criminal circles. They were an invisible force that struck without warning, protecting small communities from those who would prey on them. They'd just received something interesting. Martinez said, sliding into the booth now, a seasoned sheriff, she'd helped train law enforcement in other towns, teaching them how to resist corruption and stand against intimidation. She smiled, remembering those files we found in Millbrook Harbor, finally finished decrypting them. "What did you find? Names? Dates, locations?" Turns out Cross wasn't just building a criminal empire. He was creating a template, a way for others to target and take over. Stone entered the diner, followed by Cooper and Rodriguez. The Iron Veterans leader looked serious. "That explains what we're seeing up and down the coast. Different groups, same playbook. They're learning," Rodriguez added, spreading surveillance photos across the table. "After what happened here in Cedar Grove and Millbrook Harbor, they're getting more careful. They're operating in smaller groups, staying mobile, but still targeting small towns, still thinking they can control communities through fear and corruption." Cooper observed. Sarah studied the photos, and together they noticed the patterns were clear. Criminal organizations are adapting their methods, but they're still underestimating the strength of small communities. They're making the same fundamental mistake that Cross and the Wild Wolves had made. "They're not the only ones who've learned," Sarah said with a smile. "Every town we help becomes stronger. Every community that stands up and fights back is an example for others to follow." Her phone lit up with multiple messages. Ghost lead new activity detected in 3 coast locations. Iron Veterans Scout reports suspicious movement in harbor towns north of here. Mike's satellite shows pattern-matching Cross's template. Betty refreshed their coffee cups. Some people still need to learn the hard way. They never understand. Martinez said they see small towns as easy targets, never expecting to find people like us waiting for them. That's their biggest mistake. Sarah replied. They think they can walk into any small town, throw their weight around, and take control. They never realize that these communities have their own strength and their own protectors. Rodriguez checked her secure phone. The FBI has been tracking increased criminal activity along the coast. They're getting organized. Sharing resources is good. Stone smiled, making them easier to find. Sarah stood and moved to the window. Outside, Lighthouse Cove was alive with morning activity. Families walked without fear, businesses thrived, and the community had grown stronger than ever. The Wild Wolves were gone. Their attempted takeover was now just a story told in Betty's notebook. You know what the real difference is, Sarah asked. It's between us and them, besides the fact that we're the good guys is a big plus. Martinez said they see small towns as targets, but we see them as home. They think they can control communities through fear, but we know that real strength comes from people standing together. Her phone buzzed again. Helen from Millbrook Harbor said there are strange bikes in town and a new gang trying to move in. Cooper said it's not supposed to end like this, but Sarah replied that it never really does. As long as there are people who think they can prey on small towns, we'll be here to prove them wrong. Betty appeared with a fresh pot of coffee and her infamous apple pie. Well, then guess we better fuel up. Sounds like we've got more bullies to teach some manners. You know what I've learned this past year? In a diner, they never realized they were starting something much bigger. A network was formed. Martinez added a mission. Stone continued a family. Betty finished Sarah's phone, which lit up with final confirmation from Ghost. Lead teams were in position at all 3 locations, awaiting your command. She looked around at her unlikely family. The diner owner who'd started it all, the sheriff who'd found her courage, the Iron Veterans leader who'd become a she trusted ally, the FBI agent who'd chosen to fight from the shadows, and all the others who'd joined their cause. Well then, Sarah said, checking her weapon. Let's go. Remind some people why you should always be careful who you pick a fight with in small towns. And why, Betty added with a knowing smile, the quiet woman drinking coffee might just be the most dangerous person in the room. Outside, engines roared to life as the team prepared to move out somewhere along the coast. Other small towns were waiting for help, for hope, for someone to show them they weren't alone. And Sarah's team would be there just as they had been since that morning, when 2 bikers made the mistake that changed everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across Lighthouse Cove as Sarah's team rolled out, ready to face whatever came next. Because sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to it's so important to be careful when you're making decisions, especially when you're in a small town. You never know who might be sitting at a diner quietly drinking their coffee, just waiting for someone to make a mistake. I've got 2 more amazing stories right here on your screen. If this one is as good as I think it is, you'll definitely want to check out the others. Just click and enjoy.